A lot of people just sort of assume that when you wake up tired, or you have brain fog, or you've got aching joints, or digestive issues, or you just simply don't feel as well as you feel like you should, or like you remember feeling, you often assume it's just stress or normal aging, or maybe even just bad luck or bad genes. But here's my question, what if all of those seemingly unrelated things actually share a common denominator and they have one similar underlying process? Today we're going to talk about systemic inflammation because, and what it is, what it isn't, and why more people are paying attention to it, because there are kind of some long-term ramifications that go along with it that most people don't really think about. So, my interest in nutrition really didn't start until my dad got sick. It certainly didn't start like in the classroom. It wasn't a lifelong passion of mine. It just started when I had a health crisis in our family, and it caught my attention. And, we were challenged actually by a physician who basically said, a lot of the health you experience is within your control through diet and lifestyle. And that really, sadly, it was news to me. It was 35 years ago, so it was a long time ago, before it was a little more common to be thinking about things along those lines. But it's still, we have all heard the expression, you are what you eat, right? So you'd kind of think that it was obvious that that's what we needed to pay attention to, but it really was news to me. I'm a horse person, and I pay very close attention to how I feed my horses. I expect their health to be a result of my animal husbandry. Somehow I wasn't as specific with myself, which is kind of crazy. But one of the things that I really learned is that a lot of people really suffer with chronic health issues because they've just accepted the norms in our society. And unfortunately, the norms in our society result in like 1 in 3 people having cancer, 1 in almost 2 people having some form of heart disease, and just not having a healthy aging process. There's a difference between chronological aging and physiological aging. And, you've all seen the stories of the people that are 100 and they're still riding their horses or doing yoga or doing marathons. They've got their mental faculties and they're vibrant, and they're living independently. And I think that's kind of what we all want, but we don't really have a society that teaches us culturally how to get there. So that's what I want to spend a minute covering, because I think it is really important to be empowering people. And certainly I was empowered by what I learned. So in terms of inflammation, it's not always bad. When you get a cut or you have an injury or you have something, you need that inflammatory response, because that is going to start the healing process. Like if you get a cut or you get a splinter or twisted ankle, the inflammatory process is important for starting the healing process. The challenge is when you have that sort of subclinical chronic underlying inflammation. And the real issue, is that I'll just share an analogy that I remember Dr. Pam Popper sharing with me. She said, if you drive by a house and you see a little bit of flame coming out of the basement window, would you just keep going by, or would you stop and call the police or the fire department and say, hey, there's a house on that street that's on fire? Well, that's kind of what systemic inflammation is like. You've all got a little bit going on. And if someone doesn't sort of say, hey, you need to pay attention to that, then the house will burn down. And that's really been my passion. The more that I've learned is, how can I support people in keeping the house from burning down? Because there's so many signs that the body gives us about low-grade subclinical systemic inflammation. It's kind of crazy. People never think in terms of systemic inflammation being brain fog or fatigue or joint stiffness, digestive discomfort. Frequent cravings is oftentimes sort of what shows up at the end with systemic inflammation, difficulty recovering, sleep being disrupted, mood changes, weight gain around your middle, and just a general feeling that you're just not doing as well as you could do. So, it's it's kind of a random list, and it does vary tremendously from person to person. So, you know, the weak link in the chain is where the chain's going to break, and everyone's body is different. You know, you all know someone who can seemingly to eat anything and their stomach never gets upset. And then you know other people that they eat slightly differently and they're immediately sick to their stomach. So, you know, we all have different strengths and different weaknesses, and it is important to listen to our body and kind of learn what works and what doesn't work. So, you know, some people have a real sensitivity to gluten. Some people have a real sensitivity to ginger, you know, or spices, or it varies. And so you really want to learn to listen to your body. But some of the things that contribute to inflammation for sure are nutrition. Nutrition's probably the area where we have the most control, because no one forces anything in our mouth. We decide what we ingest, but we just don't usually have the education about what we should be eating and how important it is to kind of be extreme on that front. You know, you obviously want to be doing what you can do, and you want to start where you're at, but the more you tweak it and the more you pay attention, the better your results will be for sure. So eating a lot of fruits and veggies is absolutely critical. That's what we're designed to eat, and there's so many different reasons, and I'll spend some time on that. But poor sleep quality, you know, not paying attention and honoring, you know, I think all of us used to pride ourselves on how little sleep we got, and paying attention to your sleep and supporting your body. It is a recovery process, sleep, and so if you don't get good sleep, you're not going to get good recovery, and it doesn't really allow the body to heal and repair. Chronic stress. I think some of us sort of, again, get used to stress, and sometimes you can't do anything about it, but sometimes you can. So certainly stress management, you know, there are breathing techniques and meditation and stuff, and I'll spend some time on that. But the other thing is movement. I'm sure you've seen the stuff about how dangerous it is to be sitting all day. Movement's key. We're designed to move. We're designed to walk a lot. Of course, there's the usual, you know, recreational drugs, smoking, and alcohol, and then environmental factors. You know, people are exposed to stuff. Sometimes you don't even know you're exposed to it. So, you know, we're exposed to stuff that we don't necessarily even think about. You know, I'm thinking about plastic water bottles. You know, we just never gave it a clue. But those have stuff in them that is, you know, getting plastic out of your life is really important, especially as a woman. There are some real hormone issues that show up with plastic. And sorry, my phone's shaking. I don't have it on a tripod, but I might get that organized. So, you know, simple steps, and I'll be spending some more time on how to do these, are obviously counteracting that list: eating more plants, eating a lot of veggies, prioritizing sleep in the sense of having a sleep routine, you know, really not being on your phone right before you go to bed, putting your phone away from you while you sleep, just so that you're not tempted, as it were. Moving daily, even if that's just a little walk, or letting your phone tell you you need to stand up now and move. Getting rid of some of the ultra processed foods. Managing stress, coming up with a plan, even if it's just like little breathing. I'll share some breathing stuff in one of the things. You want it to be little steps, because you can actually implement little steps. Don't, you know, I'm 34 years into this process. I'm by no means done with my habits in terms of improving them and optimizing them, but I definitely started slowly. And so what I share is where I'm at, but that's years of accumulated habits. So you've got to look at where you're at and where you can start. But I think the big thing about systemic inflammation is to understand that there may be something that you're calling one thing that actually has inflammation as its root. And the medical system is definitely designed to sort of look at that one thing and treat that one thing. And oftentimes, if you can get the underlying cause eliminated, then good stuff will happen. And that and maybe other things will go away. So that's really, you know, just like when I train a horse, I try and figure out, why are they behaving like that? Do they not understand? Are they not physically able to do it? Are they not mentally understanding or able to do it? You know, you want to get to the communication part of it. And it's the same with the body. The body is giving you these symptoms, and those symptoms really are a knock on the door saying, hey, pay attention. There's something going on. And how you pay attention becomes important, because if you go to someone and say, you know, hey, my wrist hurts, and you go to a hand and wrist doctor, they might just look at that problem and say, hey, this is what we can do about it, instead of why did it start hurting in the first place? And so when my dad got sick, I became very focused on why did that trajectory of health happen in the first place? And I became very focused on what can I personally do to support my own body and being as vibrant and as healthy as it can be. And that's what I hope to do with sharing is, kind of what I've learned. And so I'd love it if you'd share a comment in terms of, what your journey has been like, and what, maybe what I've shared here that resonates the most with you. Let me know in the comments, because obviously this is a one-way street. I'm just doing this video, but I'd love to hear back from you where you're at with your journey, and kind of what part of that journey you're in. If you're just beginning, or if you're like me and you're kind of a long way down the road with a lot of different things, share that with me, and I'd love to hear it. And tomorrow, I will be covering about 10 signs that your body may be dealing with inflammation and why we often miss those. So join me for tomorrow, and thanks for tuning in.